If you can't afford to pay your operating expenses out of that account, that tells you a few things. Number one, maybe you're not charging enough. Number two, maybe there is a issue with invoicing. And the last thing is collections. We cannot forget about our collections. If you don't have the money inside your operating expense account to pay your bills, it very well could be because you're not collecting in time.
Welcome to the Sales Made Simple podcast. This podcast is dedicated to helping overwhelmed outdoor living professionals, landscapers, and hardscapers just like you increase your closing rate to over 75% without doubling your workload so you can build a seven-figure business that doesn't need you. I'm your host, Joshua Gillow. Let's dig in. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Sales Made Simple podcast. This is your host, Joshua Gillow, and today I have Adam Lineman on, and we're going to talk deeply about how to quit living paycheck to paycheck and start hitting seven figures. That's what we're going to focus on today. And the three takeaways I want to get you guys to understand by the end of this episode is some signs that you are possibly living paycheck to paycheck. Sometimes it's a hard thing to face. Also, how so many hardworking business owners get into the rat race. And we're going to talk about what the rat race is here in a little bit, and how to get out of it and to build a legacy for you and your family. So Adam, welcome.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So one statistic I saw on your website, which I thought was very interesting, it says that 83% of contractors live paycheck to paycheck. Can you walk us into that a little bit and how you found that and that kind of thing?
Sure. So with that statistic, 83% are living paycheck to paycheck. That's a really high percentage, right? And really what the problem comes into play is with contractors, honestly, just not really knowing what to charge in order to make a profit, right? So with all the equipment they buy, all the expenses that they have, and everything else that they have at running a business, they don't know what they need to be ultimately charging to have money left over. And so I know we're going to talk more about the profit first method, but we kind of flip that formula to ensure profit is made a priority in your business.
I love that. And it's so true. Why work? Because I know that our industry is full of tons of men and women that are just hardworking out there trying to do their best. And at the end of, say a week-long project or a month-long project, to have no money left over, to be like, man, I worked all that. I said no to my family and the baseball games and all that stuff just to make my customer happy so I could keep running my business, and to have nothing left over at the end. Because so often we get focused on that top line number, right? Like we got to hit $1 million this year. But the problem is you might hit $1 million. It might cost you $1 million to hit it. And then you have nothing at the end, right? So what I love about the profit first focus is the idea that you actually put profits on. So I'd love for you to walk us into, what's different about the profit first focus when it comes to bidding projects or running your business.
Sure. So, Josh, if I were to ask you, what's the number one most important thing in your life, or the number one or number two most important thing in your life, or person in your life, what would you say?
God.
Okay. And what would be number two?
My wife, family.
Your wife. Right. So typically what you make a priority, like God and your wife, is you put more emphasis in and spend more time with and make it a priority. So with profit first, contractors make profit a priority. And some people think, well, maybe it should be my people. Maybe they should be number one, or other things like that in their business. But I challenge contractors to think that if they make profit a priority, they can then reinvest back into their business and make things better for their team members. If you don't have a profitable business, you don't have a sustainable business. That's really ultimately what we need to be thinking about. Profitability drives growth. It drives pay raises for your team members. Profitability drives things like maybe being able to fund a Little League baseball team. So profit really is so important that you have money left over in order to run your business and then make it sustainable.
Exactly. And, we talk often here in a podcast about service, about our main focus is to be able to serve our clients at the highest level. And all of that is wonderful, listeners, to be able to serve and to be able to help them through a sales process to get exactly what they need to solve their problems beautifully. But without a profit at the end of the project, how long can you continue to do that for free, or do that for a hoped for profit. Keep your fingers crossed. I mean, I know many years where I just said, hey, I'm going to do these projects and I hope at the end of the year there's going to be money. I didn't want to look at the books. I was scared to look at the books, right? It was like, I don't want to do that. It's like a dream killer there. Like, oh, we hit 500,000, we hit 750, we hit $1 million in revenue. I didn't want to see how much it cost me to do that. I didn't have a plan. I was just doing the same thing more in order to get a different result and to get a higher result. So how would, let me back this up. So you guys look at things differently. Normally you would look at a situation where you look at sales minus expenses equals profit, right? That's how we're all taught to run our books, if you will, or at least look at the numbers that way. How is Profit First different?
So rather than looking at your P&L and having your net profit at the very bottom, the last thing you look at, we recommend Profit First, like we talked about. And that's really all about just allocating money towards profit and doing that consistently. The Profit First methodology teaches us to take all of your income and just very basic, simple terms. If a contractor were to go out and open up just one bank account tomorrow, other than the accounts that they typically normally have, which is their income account, and allocate maybe just 1% of every dollar that they make a deposit into their bank, they will start to build up their profit account, and they will have that money and be insured a profitable business at the end of the year. Now, when we help implement Profit First with other contractors, there's multiple bank accounts. There's accounts for taxes, owner's pay, operating expenses, and then profit. But at the very least, the very basic is open up that 1% account and start funding it with profit.
Got it. So what it sounds like, and I know, that the framework you guys are looking into here is having buckets. You correct me if I'm wrong, like buckets where you would actually take certain allocations of monies coming in and putting them there, being very purposeful and very
Right.
disciplined and doing that so that you're not guessing, because so often, those big accounts, those big business accounts, we use them as piggy banks, right? We're like, holy crap, there's like $100,000 sitting in there. Like I can go buy stuff. Like I always wanted the 4-wheeler. I always wanted this. I always wanted that. And we start to commingle that with our own personal stuff, right? Like I can buy that.
Sure.
I got lots of money in there. Problem is that some of that money, if not all of that money, is really earmarked for future expenses. And if we're not careful, we can spend ourselves right into debt. So, with this Profit First model, when you take this and have different buckets in the bank and you take your 100% deposit for a project and you're breaking it up into smaller pieces and putting it in those buckets, again, it's a discipline that that one bucket you never touch. And so when it comes to buying fun things, is there any buckets for the fun things?
There is. So the money, what we recommend is like every quarter, the money that you have in your profit account every quarter is to take a small portion of that and celebrate. I don't care if it's going out and buying ice cream for the family, or if it's going out and buying a $200 fancy steak dinner, or maybe it's buying a side-by-side like what I did when I started Profit First. But you do want to take a portion of that profit and celebrate. But maybe it's only 10% of that whole bucket, or maybe it's 20% of the whole bucket. So that's what we recommend with Profit First is you take that profit bucket and every quarter is you take a small portion and celebrate. Every quarter, you take another portion, maybe it's 25%, and use it to pay down debt. And then the last portion of it is just to keep it in that bank account and start to build up an emergency fund to where you can pay your expenses if we ever have another COVID or a situation like that. Any type of a disaster, maybe your shop burns down, you have a major accident, there's always going to be that time, a few times in your life where you're going to need some extra money as an emergency fund. So profit can also be used for that.
I love that. And, if you're focused on living paycheck to paycheck, or in this case, deposit to deposit when it comes to projects, right?
Right.
With that being the case, when things do happen, something happens on a truck or something, God forbid, something happens in your health or something happens in the market, whatever it might be, how exposed are you to, being able to weather that storm? Or are you exposed as a major risk where you're like, wait a minute here, all it takes is one banana peel and I'm going to slip and fall and be done with this thing? Or do you have some money sitting aside, sitting in the background, waiting for those kinds of things? And I know that wasn't a discipline I had early in my career. I was going paycheck to paycheck, deposit to deposit, right? I was paying taxes for last year with these deposits from this year and whatever it took to get it through. But until I started to realize this idea, it really started to change the way that I looked at things. And so often I see out there guys working and they're making more money. They're finally starting to hit that, whatever, 750 or $1 million or $2 million mark. And then all of a sudden their houses get bigger and their cars get more and their trips get bigger and all
Right.
this stuff just becomes, so they have this lifestyle creep where it starts to expand as well. And it's like, well, if you add a zero to how much you're bringing in, you should add a zero to how much you're spending too. And pretty soon it just becomes a bigger game. So how does Profit First work as you are growing, as far as growing a company, and how does it keep you disciplined to make sure that you're not overspending or becoming careless or frivolous?
So you're with Profit First. It's very much, as like I mentioned earlier, an allocation based cash management system. Um, you put certain percentages away into your profit account first, your owner's pay account. That's another big thing that we need to talk about now and or in the future, or in the future is owner's pay. Profit does not equals owner's pay. I want to stress that. Profit does not equals owner's pay. So an owner of a business needs to be paying themselves a fair and healthy salary and turning a profit on top of that. Particularly if the owner's working in the business, right? If they're not just sitting back and just like has the business as an investment and letting
Yeah.
other people run it, they need to be getting paid themselves too. So Profit First has profit, owner's pay. You have to pay your taxes so you don't go to jail. And
Yep.
then everything else is for operating expenses. And you have percentages that you allocate based off your income on a weekly or a biweekly basis. Now, how does it adjust when you grow your business? Will it adjust? The percentages do. So if a business is nearing $1 million to $2 million or $3 million, typically operating expenses change, and particularly overhead changes. More than likely, if you're running a $3 to $4 million business, you probably have a person or two in the office. You probably have a salesperson or two, and therefore your overhead expenses are up. So that's why the percentages change. And that's why it's also another good reason to have clarity in where your money's going with Profit First and having those smaller buckets or those bank accounts to be able to see what money you have and what money you could actually have to spend and use to operate your business.
You mentioned a couple of times here about having percentages. If I was a listener listening and thinking like, all right, this would be great to have multiple bank accounts and be able to plug in so much by each check, and therefore I have certainty that it'll be enough for each person to be paid and
Right.
overhead and all of those things. How do we come up as a business owner? How do we come up with those allocations? How do we come up with that percentage? Who does that? How do we figure
Sure.
that out?
So the percentages actually came up by author of Profit First, Mike Michalowicz. And what he did is he studied thousands of businesses and generally looked at where people's buckets of monies are going and then what percentages of profits they should be having in order to have a sustainable business. Let's just say a business is $500,000 in revenue or less. Generally speaking, you probably want to be having about 10% profit. You want to be putting 10% away for taxes. So that leaves you 80% left, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're running a $500,000 business, maybe owner's pay is somewhere in the maybe 35% range. So that might give you around $45,000, $50,000 of owner's pay. And then the rest of the percentage would be for your operating expenses. So it's really about having a balance and ensuring, once again, 5 to 20% profit left over, depending on the business size, and paying the owner a fair and healthy salary. Everything else needs to be taxes and then operating expenses.
Got it. Okay. No, that's certainly very helpful to know, what that spread would look like. Now, does that differ between businesses, or is that pretty cut and dry when it comes to the different levels of income?
Sure. Different types of businesses, it does differ a little bit. I do want to mention that, like lawn care businesses maybe are a little bit different than landscaping businesses, right? Lawn care businesses typically have much more labor involved for the dollar revenue that you can generate if you're doing a lot of mowing versus putting in $20,000 hardscape patios, right? You might
Mm-hmm.
only need 2 or 3 team members to do projects like that, to where if you're mowing 200 yards a week to generate the same amount of revenue, you might need 4 or 5 or 6 different people to generate that revenue. So it does change based off of the type of business, what it is, what type of industry you're in, and so on. But what I specialize in is the lawn care and landscaping industry. We have percentages based off of our industry.
Got it.
Last but not least, Profit First does say 15% set aside for taxes. We have typically seen, based off of all of our clients that we worked with, around 7 to 10% being more accurate. So depending on the type of business that you are, Um, 7 to 10% is what I would be shooting for, putting away to pay your taxes at the end of the year. And then any money that you don't need to pay your taxes at the end of the year can go to the profit account. So it doesn't go to waste or anything like that. It's just there and earmarked for paying Uncle Sam. If you have some money left over, it goes to your profit account.
That's great. I love that there's a discipline there, and I love that there's, there's a process there, right? Because if we don't have systems and processes, we all talk about that as business owners. We want to have systems and processes, but if you don't follow them or you put them in place and you don't do anything about them, they're just wasted.
Sure.
So often when money's come in business, it's like, all right, well, I'm just going to go out and buy that thing I've always wanted. Now I have all this money in this account. I can just go spend it and we'll just deal with it later. And we got to be very careful of that, listeners, that we don't go out there and think that's a piggy bank and we can just go
Right.
spend it for
And
a
it's the
bigger
same type
lifestyle.
of concept as credit cards can get people in a lot of trouble if they're not careful with them,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you have a
Mm-hmm.
debit card, you're probably not going to get into as much trouble, or if you are, it's going to cut you off because there's no more money left.
That's right.
So kind of think about it like in those terms, and back to the operating expense account particularly. So let's talk about the operating expense account. Let's just say you're earmarked 60%, 65% in your operating expense account to pay your bills. And well, what does your operating expenses pay? Maybe it pays employee payroll. Maybe it pays your electric bill, your rent, and your truck payments. Okay. If you can't afford to pay your operating expenses out of that account, that tells you a few things. Number one, maybe you're not charging enough. Number two, maybe there is a issue with invoicing. I know some contractors that forget to invoice. I know some contractors that don't invoice out for 4 or 6 weeks after a project is done. Cash flow is so important. All right. So I
Mm-hmm.
preach that is to invoice out as quick as you can as soon as the project is done. And the last thing is collections. We cannot forget about our collections. If you don't have the money inside your operating expense account to pay your bills, it very well could be because you're not collecting in time. Same situation. You need to have someone on your team, whether it's yourself, whether you're hiring a collection agency, whatever that looks like. There needs to be somebody that is collecting your money in a timely manner and holding your customers accountable to paying their bill on time.
So true. So true. And that's kind of brings me to my next point here. When it comes to your business, if you don't have any kind of process, communication or sales process in place, how do your customers know when to pay? If it's just like all right, I need a deposit, give me 10% now or 25% now, I'll show up when I can. And then you do the project and you're just asking for draws here and there. The client is not really sure what's going on. But when you are very clear about that and you have it set up, either in a document or you've spoken through it or it's in your contract about, hey, we do a 25% collection up front. We do a 25% when we start. And this is just hypothetical, of course, 25% when we're halfway through, and then the final 25% toward the end. When you do that, then the client knows what's coming next. You're setting expectations, but that all comes from having that sales process in place and setting those expectations ahead of time. So your client's not like, hey, I don't know what's happening now. This guy did the work. It's been weeks. He hasn't asked for his money. Like, I don't know what he's going to do. And then you come back with a bill that's what they thought it was going to be. Say it was going to be 11 grand to do the project. And you come back with a $13,000 bid or bill for them. And they're like, what happened? What's this $2,000? Well, you added these things and they forgot they added these things. The next thing you know, you're fighting them. You don't have any of the money. So to your point, it's very important to make sure that you're tracking as you're moving. And I know that takes time. You guys are out building some cool stuff, but it may take putting somebody in the office and seeing if the overhead can handle that in order to make sure these things are done, or you get yourself out of the field so you can handle these things.
Right. And like you mentioned, processes. It's a process.
Yep.
And if the landscaper has a good contract, if they're putting in their contract with the expectations of down payments and or when the customer's bills are due, really they're like architecting their cash flow, right?
Yeah.
So that's important. And like I
It is.
mentioned, back with flash invoicing, I like to call it flash invoicing, getting them out like that, and or collecting, staying on top of those, right? Because it's so important to your business. Your team members are obviously making it required that you're paying them on a weekly or biweekly basis, right? Um, if you're not paying them on time, they're not showing up for work. So it needs to go both ways, particularly with your customers, that they need to be good customers that are paying you in a reasonable amount of time as well.
Absolutely. So what are some signs that as a contractor listening out there, that they could say yes or no to whether they're going paycheck to paycheck without it just being obvious that, paycheck to paycheck. But are there other signs that are glaring that you see when you're coaching people that
Yeah.
puts them on that in that 83% category?
So I always say if you can't pay your bills, you can afford your bills. So obviously, like you mentioned, if if they don't have any money to pay, that's a sign right there. One of the other common things that I see is contractors believe that they are actually a profitable business. And why they believe that is because they maybe are running a software program or accounting software like a QuickBooks, and they can print out a P&L and they're like, yay, 5%, right? 5% profit.
Yep.
I'm actually making money. But here's the problem. And here's where we show them why they're probably not, is when we ask them, okay, if your P&L is saying that you have a 5 or 10% profit, how much cash do you have in the bank? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I don't have any cash in my bank. And that's actually an issue. But your profit and loss statement says you're profitable. So why is there no cash in the bank? Well, the reason why that happens and exists is because there's things that you have to pay for that are not on your P&L. And I know that shocks people, right? But things such as assets and liabilities and loans that are on your balance sheet that you are paying off every month, maybe it's a skid steer, maybe it's a truck, things like that, live on your balance sheet. And that's cash flow that comes out of your bank account and is not on your P&L. So that is one area to where we explain to customers that your P&L may say that you're profitable, but you don't have cash in the bank. So that's an issue, and that can get you in a lot of trouble. Contractors, we like shiny new equipment, and we're proud of it. I see a lot of people, contractors on social media, throwing pictures up of their 3 or 4 brand new dump trucks that are $100,000 each, or their huge fleet of equipment and so on. And that is impressive. Don't get me wrong, but can you really afford that? Was that
Yeah.
really the best purchase option? I don't
Yep.
know until I dig into your financials and see your way of life and how you want to live. But it's more than likely, it can be not a healthy business decision.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you think of it that way. I know that shocked me when I first learned about, I'm like, P&L tells me everything. There's money in it. It's great, but why doesn't the P&L number match the bank number? Like, I don't
Right.
understand why that there's no correlation there. And I'm thinking, why is that? Like, on paper, it looks like we made a lot of money, but there's only $5,000 in the bank. Like, what the hell?
Right.
So that's a good piece to understand out there, listeners, is the fact that, that there's a lot of other expenses that go into beyond that profit and loss statement that impact how much money you have in the bank. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters, right? That's what you can spend. You can't spend the money from a P&L. You can only spend the money in the bank. So be very clear that one is not equal to the other.
And something else to think about too is if you are your P&L can also be a big indicator on how you're running it. So this is a little bit more of an advanced discussion here, but you can run your profit and loss statement as a accrual basis, or you can run your profit and loss statement as a cash basis. In profit first terms, we always run it on a cash basis, which is really true money going in and money going out. On an accrual basis, it can be skewed a lot. And what I mean by that is, let's just say that you just sold a $20,000 maintenance contract for a small commercial property, and they're going to prepay for the year. Well, your P&L is going to look really, really healthy in the beginning of the year because you have all that money, and it's showing that up there on the accrual basis. But when you really look at your cash going in and cash going out over the period of the whole year, it's going to not reflect that so much. So your P&L can be skewed based off of how you're running it and also how you're taking your payments and your invoicing, for that fact.
Absolutely. No, I love that. I love that, Adam. So, I'd like to go back here quick before we wrap up, the idea of getting out of the rat race. So the rat race is basically roughly defined as you just constantly make money and spend money, make money and spend money. And as your business grows, you keep spending more money to live a bigger lifestyle. Therefore, it just add a zero to your expenses, add a zero to your income. All that just keeps expanding. And then you wonder why you never feel deep down like you're actually getting anywhere, because it's just more stuff, more stress, more overwhelm, more shiny objects to watch, and more plates to keep in the air, twirling. So, one thing that I learned along the way is that your profit account, that you allocate 10 to 20% of that profit and you put it away. right? You put it away into a long-term, some kind of a long-term asset. It's either going to be into, you want to do stocks, bonds, you want to get into, other assets, retirement plans, you want to get into real estate, you want to get into something that money starts to work for you while you're sleeping. Because that's the ultimate goal, right? For that money to be expanding when you're sleeping, when you're on vacation, it's growing. Because if you don't, listeners, if you don't, and you just work that paycheck to paycheck for the rest of your life, by the end, you'll just end up with a lot of bills and nothing to show for all of this hard work. So to be disciplined, that's why I love the profit first system, to be disciplined enough to put some of that money away. That is the no touch fund. That is my future fund. Let's just call it my retirement tax, right? You put that away and then you can start sleeping at night better when you know the economy's changing and you don't have enough work coming in and all that. You're like, you know what? It's okay. It's okay because I've been saving. I've been a squirrel, storing nuts out there. I've been doing that and not buying as many different fun things to do now, but being disciplined to think of the future. So I just wanted to hit that for the guys out there listening that really want to create a legacy, that really want to help their family go from where they are now to another level. It takes discipline now. It takes saying no to yourself when you want to buy that shiny new dirt bike or that shiny new truck or that camper or something like that. Is there a way you can rent it? Is there a way you can lease it? Is there another way you can do this to keep that money going into that long-term asset account so that it can be making money when you're sleeping? That's the ultimate goal of this entire thing called business, isn't it?
It is. And, it's probably not nearly as high of a percentage, but man, I tell you what, if you have 5 or 10 grand, in your bank account right now, if you can put that aside, if you truly don't need it, even on a CD these days, CDs are paying 5% locally, it's a great way to put it away for 3 months, 6 months, whatever, and make a few $100 or $1,000 here or there based off of that. But you're right. It can be a hamster wheel. And it feels like you are never getting anywhere. And I think what that really still boils down to is having too much expenses and not knowing what to charge in order to make a profit.
Yep.
That's what it boils down to me. Not all revenue is good revenue. And that's kind of one thing I just want to stress. Not all revenue is good revenue. You can be selling $100,000 job and having $100,000 in expenses, and you're not making any money.
That's right.
Or the same thing goes for on some of these national trade magazines where they have the top 150 companies, right? They're doing $300 million, And what I don't like about that is I could care less. I want to know what the top 150 profitable companies are. What's their secret sauce? What are they doing? What's their business model?
100%. Yeah. I mean, profit and cash flow is the lifeblood of a business. Without it, what's the reason? If you want to go serve people, then just do it on the side. You know what I mean? When it comes to like just serve them for free or just to help or to give or to donate, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're running a true business, profit is the lifeblood. Cash flow is the lifeblood of that business. And without it, if we're just going down the street, asking the guy how much you charge him per square foot, and then doing the same thing, being like, all right, well, if he charges 18, I'm going to charge 17. And the next thing you know, you're out of business, or you find yourself in a position where you might have quote unquote made top line revenue of $500,000, but it cost you 550 to do it. And you're like, what happened? I don't understand this thing called business. It's something wrong with this. So listeners, I just hope out there that you've listened to what, Adam has said today. I hope that some of this has stuck with you, because there's just so much truth in all of this. There's just so much that if we aren't focused, if we aren't disciplined on our cash flow, if we aren't focused and disciplined on profit and being profitable, charging the right amount up front, it's going to be only a matter of time before you've got to pull the shingle down and be like, I can't keep doing this, and go back to public works or do whatever you're going to do otherwise, because business isn't for everybody. There's a discipline involved in all of that. Definitely. So Adam, I appreciate you coming on. We had the opportunity today to see if, find out those signs. Are you truly one of those 83% that are going paycheck to paycheck? And if you are, how can you change it? By becoming more focused on profit first, about pricing your projects right, about making sure that you see where you're spending your money and not getting lost in profit and loss sheet land, thinking that's where your money is at. It's really about what's in the bank at the end of the day. And also how so many hardworking business owners get stuck in the rat race where as they grow their business, they just keep spending more and spending more and spending more. And eventually they just have bigger bills and bigger things to watch at all the time. And also how you can get out of it and to build that legacy by putting that money away in that profit account, and then by investing that money in something that grows while you're sleeping. That's really what it's all about. And if you haven't read the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, that'll give you a sense into a lot of this stuff about how to get out of that rat race. That's what he talks deeply about. So, Adam, I appreciate you coming on this week. And next week, guys, we're going to focus on how you'll never hit $1 million in sales if you don't follow this one simple rule. Adam will be back with us. We're going to unpack that one. So, Adam, thanks for coming on.